Trump 2.0 and Iran situation in the Middle East has changed significantly since the last time Donald Trump was in the White House. The drivers of the Arab Iranian relationship are different, and there is now scope for engagement between Tehran and Washington. But there are many moving parts in the region's complex geopolitics. As the second Trump administration consolidates itself, Arab media has found the president's Middle East appointees a confusing group of loyalists, even as the Israeli media has startled by picks such as Michael Dimino, the new Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, who is vocally opposed to war with Iran and advocates a diplomatic approach in the region. Trump's other picks, such as Marco Rubio for Secretary of State and Mike Waltz for the National Security Advisor, are known hawks on Iran. The nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, awaits Senate confirmation. Besides the now paused war in Gaza, how to deal with Iran will be the most prominent question for US Middle East policy in Trump 2.0. How has the region changed since Trump was last in the Oval Office, and what factors could determine the alignment or divergence between Tehran and Washington now? Iran's situation has evolved significantly since Trump 1.0. The anti Israel axis of resistance has been greatly weakened, especially over the past year, but Tehran has cultivated a new positive relationship with its Arab neighbors that sprang from Saudi Iran reapproachment brokered by China in 23. Within Iran, a major shift has taken place. Besides the now paused war in Gaza, how to deal with Iran will be the most prominent question for the US Middle East policy in Trump 2.0. How has the region changed since Trump was last in Oval Office, and what factors could determine alignment on divergence between Tehran and Washington now? Iran's situation has evolved significantly since Trump 1.0. The anti Israel axis of resistance has been greatly weakened, especially over the past year. But Tehran has cultivated a new positive relationship with its Arab neighbors that sprang from Saudi Iran rapprochement brokered by China in 23. Within Iran, a major shift has taken place. The economic and social tumult in the country worsened under President Ibrahim Raisi, a conservative hardliner who, at the time of his death last May, had been in the race to succeed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as supreme leader. Under President Masoud Pezeshkian, Tehran has megaphoned its desire to engage with the West to lift sanctions while while also warning against underestimating military capabilities and projecting a position of strength through nuclear enrichment. At the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 22, Iran's Vice President for Strategic Affairs Javed Zarif has said he hoped Trump's second term would see a more rational approach towards Iran to ensure regional security. But in the statement following Trump's inauguration, both Zarif and Iran's hardline leaders have made it clear that they should not be seen as being weak. It is evident that Tehran is looking for signals from Washington even as it prepares for a return of the Trump 1.0 policy of maximum pressure through more sanctions. Importantly, Zarif said he believed that 2018 decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal was imposed on Trump by hawks such as former NSA Bolton and former US Special Representative for Iran Brian Hook. Bolton, Hook, and Hook's former boss Mike Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State from 2018-20, have not found a place in second Trump administration. On January 23, 2 days after Mino's appointment as the Pentagon's Middle East policy chief, the security protections of all three men were pulled. Government-affiliated Iranian media have viewed all these as positive signs of change. When Trump first took office in 2017, the Arab world's relationship with Iran was crisis ridden. In 2016, Saudi Arabia and Iran had broken diplomatic ties over the execution of Sheikh Nimr, a Saudi Shia cleric. In 2017, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman declared that there would be no dialogue with Iran, and the then Foreign Minister Adil al Zubair accused Tehran of using its proxies to undermine the sovereignty of Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The unprecedented blockade of Qatar by Arab League during 2017-21 was triggered in part of Qatar's seemingly warm ties with Iran. All of this detailed neatly with Trump's maximum pressure approach. Today, Arab states are prioritizing regional stability based on economic diversification, catalyzed by their opposition to Israel's war in Gaza. They have deepened their rapprochement with Iran, Riyadh, and Tehran, and are even exploring defense cooperation. In 23, MBS declared that ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia are a part of historic turning point. In 2023, today Arab states are prioritizing regional stability or economic diversification. Catalyzed by their opposition to Israel's war in Gaza, they have deepened their rapprochement with Iran. Riyadh and Tehran are now exploring even defense cooperation. In November 23, MBS declared that ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia are at a historic turning point. That same month, the extraordinary joint summit of the Arab League and Organization of Islamic Organization in Riyadh passed a resolution terming Israel's action in Gaza genocide and called for a halt to the aggression. The current situation in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq has increased the Arab comfort for engagement with Iran. The Bashar al Assad regime has collapsed. Hezbollah has lost its senior leadership in Lebanon, and Iraq is working to disarm Iran backed groups or to integrate them in the Iraqi armed forces. At the November 24 Arab Islamic Summit in Riyadh, MBS warned Israel against attacking Iran. Arab officials expect that Trump, in his second term, will recognize the new realities in the Middle East. The Saudi foreign minister this week said he did not believe the US would encourage war with Iran. The ceasefire in Gaza has created conditions for deliberation and contact between Iran and the US. The Trump administration is pushing Israel to withdraw from Lebanon as per the schedule agreed with Hezbollah, denying the Israel Defense Forces the extension that the previous Biden administration had promised. The question is how Tehran and Washington could engage under Trump with neither party to lose face before their conservative constituencies. Trump remains strongly pro Israel and had ordered the first significant direct attack on Iran's extraterritorial capabilities with the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in 2020. The constituency in Iran that Soleimani represented still exists. Whether maximum pressure returns will also be subject to consideration on how the new sanctions on Iran might affect global energy markets, which are already strained by US sanctions on Russia. One reason why the Biden administration did not strictly enforce oil related macro level sanctions on Iran at the press conference in New York in September 24, then candidate Trump had appeared to make an overture on Iran. We have to make a deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. We have to make a deal. The question is how Tehran and Washington could engage under Trump with neither party having to lose face before their conservative constituencies. Trump remains strongly pro Israel and had ordered the first significant direct attack on Iran's extraterrestrial capabilities with the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in 2020. The constituency in Iran that Soleimani represented still exists. At the press conference in New York in September 24, then candidate Trump had appeared to make an overture in Iran to Iran. We have to make a deal with Iran because consequences are impossible. Trump's and Iran's dual perspectives notwithstanding, there is indeed some space for alignment of objectives. The potential full withdrawal of the US troops from Iraq, for example, is in line with both Trump's anti war objectives and Tehran's goal of expelling occupiers from the region. Iran's desire for a reduced US military presence in Middle East aligns with Trump's larger political philosophy. As Israel lobbies for the harsher US line against Iran, In return for accommodating Trump's demand in Gaza and Lebanon, the Arab state presents their rapprochement with Iran as the key variable for stability in the region, which requires US support and Israeli cooperation to be preserved. The question is whether Trump will reconcile with the changed Middle East or whether it will be the other way round. Adults diagnosed with ADHD have shorter life expectancy study. Why Bombay High Court has said the use of loudspeaker is not essential to religion. No one can claim their right to practice religion has been violated when permission to use a loudspeaker is denied. No one can claim that their right to practice religion has been violated when permission to use loudspeaker is denied. The use of loudspeakers and public address systems cannot be deemed an essential practice that sought to be protected by the law. The bench of Justices Gadkari and Chandra prescribed a graded penalty system when complaints of noise pollution are filed by citizens. The High Court was hearing a writ petition filed by two residents' associations in Mumbai against the use of loudspeakers by mosques and madrasas beyond permissible decibel limits and during prohibited hours. Under the Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Rules 2000, under the Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Rules 2000, Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Rules 2000, the noise levels in residential areas during the day must not exceed 55 decibels and at night 45 decibels. Section 38 of the Maharashtra Police Act allows police to stop music, sound or noise and to resign, modify or alter the permission to use loudspeakers. In their affidavit of the November 23, the police submitted that noise levels at two mosques in the Kurla area were 79.4 and 98.7 decibels. The High Court observed that in case several religious places in the vicinity were using loudspeakers, the cumulative sound levels of all loudspeakers voice amplifiers in use at a particular point of time and not the individual ambient noise limit of 55 to 45 decibels should be considered. Since the petitioners had pleaded that police were not taking action on their complaint, the court issued directions to the government and police on how to deal with complaints relating to noise pollution. Since the plea was about noise pollution from places of worship, the court cautioned the police to act without identifying the complainant, more so to avoid such complaint being target of ill will and developing hatred. The state should have an inbuilt mechanism to control decibel levels in loudspeakers and other sound emitting gadgets used at any religious place. One way to do this is by carrying is to carry out calibration or auto fixation of the decibel limit in these speakers. The Mumbai Police Commissioner should ensure that police officers use a decibel level measuring mobile application to check for violations. The High Court laid down four-step graded penalty system for police to initiate while first-time offenders could be let off after a caution. In case of repeated violations, fines must be imposed on the concerned trust organizations and they must be warned of strict action in case of further violations. Thereafter, if violations continue, police shall seize the loudspeakers and can also cancel the license for their use and initiate a complaint against those using them. In a separate contempt plea, High Court on January 14 sought to know what action government has taken in respect of 2,900 loudspeakers that were being used without permission. The High Court ruling referred to the 2016 verdict in Dr. Mahesh Vijay Bedekar versus Maharashtra, which had directed strict implementation of noise pollution regulation and control rules. The 2016 ruling by the High Court said the places of worship could not escape being penalized for noise pollution and that the use of loudspeakers is not an essential part of any religion. The use of loudspeakers could not be claimed as a fundamental right under Article 25 and Article 19, Class 1, Subclass A, freedom of speech and expression. The 2016 ruling referred to past Supreme Court judgment and directed that loudspeakers cannot be used between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. It also prohibited the use of horns in silent zones and prohibited night hours in residential areas. The ruling said the state government could permit the use of loudspeakers between 10 p.m. and midnight during cultural and religious occasions for 15 days in the calendar year, except in silent zones. Areas up to 100 meters around schools, colleges, religious places, and courts are silent zones. The 2016 ruling also allowed exceptions in time limits in closed premises for communication in auditoriums, conference rooms, community halls, and banquet halls during night hours and in case of public emergency. Delhi and Jakarta, as Indo-Pacific becomes a principal arena of global contestation, India and Indonesia need to reboot ties. Few nations in the world outside the subcontinent are closer to India in terms of geography, history, culture, and modern political orientation than Indonesia. Yet the relationship has never acquired the quantitative intensity and qualitative salience that it deserves. The visit of Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto this week to Delhi as a chief guest of this year's Republic Day celebrations will hopefully help lend the much needed strategic content to the bilateral relationship. Indonesian leaders have been among the most frequent guests at the annual Republic Day celebrations. Indonesian leader Sukarno was indeed the chief guest at the very first such celebration in 1950. Hopes for a productive bilateral relationship and shared leadership of post-colonial Asia as the founding members of the non-aligned movement could never really materialize in Delhi and Jakarta drifted apart during the Cold War. It was only since the 1990s, when India sought to reconnect with Southeast Asia, that the relationship with Indonesia began to grow. Despite India's Act East policy and the importance Delhi attaches to the Indo Pacific, India's partnership with Indonesia remains well below its potential. President Subianto's visit should help the Indian establishment and the foreign policy community to better appreciate the strategic significance of Indonesia. It is the fourth largest by population in the world with its economy at $1.4 trillion. Indonesia is well poised to power its way into the top 10 economies of the world by 2030. As a large archipelagic nation, the thousands of Indonesian islands are a bridge between Indian and Pacific Oceans. The lines of communication traversing the Indonesian waters form the lifeline of global commerce between the East Asia, India, Africa, Middle East, and Europe. Rich in natural resources, Indonesia is vital for economic growth of India and the rest of Asia. Indonesia also forms the backbone of Association of Southeast Asian Nations at the center of regional economic integration as well as political and security consultations. As he arrives in India, the popular approval of Subianto, who took charge of the nation last October, is soaring beyond 80%. Coming to Delhi quite early in his tenure, the Indonesian president is well placed to give a big boost to the bilateral relationship. Delhi and Jakarta need to accelerate trade relations, currently at paltry $30 billion, make a vigorous effort to deepen the interaction between two economies, intensify marine security cooperation, set up military exchanges, and launch defense industrial cooperation. At a time when great power relations are in flux and Indo-Pacific has become the principal arena of global contestation, Delhi and Jakarta need to rediscover the logic of bilateral and regional cooperation that brought them together in the middle of 20th century. Delhi, however, will be wise to avoid viewing the relationship with Jakarta through the lens of China or a crude geopolitical prism. Indonesia has a strong tradition of following balanced relations with all the major powers. Delhi should focus on advancing the partnership with Jakarta to realize the full potential of bilateral cooperation or promote peace and prosperity in Asia. Budget's context, not so impressive results of India's largest consumer goods seller, cement maker, and private lender tell a larger story. Hindustan Unilever has posted a 1.8% year on year sales revenue growth in October December 24. This makes it a sixth consecutive quarter of sub 4% top line growth for the fastest moving consumer goods bellwether. Moreover, volume growth has been flat with down trading or sales of small packs outgrowing large packs. Ultratech Cement's domestic sales volume grew 10% annually during the last quarter, but revenues were just up by 2.9%, reflecting the pressures from a demand slowdown. HDFC Bank's gross bad loans have risen to 16% from 1.26% to and from 1.26% to 1.42% of its total outstanding advances in the last 1 year. The not so impressive results of India's largest consumer goods seller, cement maker, and private lender tell a story of a struggling economy. This is a sobering context against which the Union Budget of 25-26 would be presented next week. US President Donald Trump's threats of import tariff hikes, visa crackdown, and other immigration and related actions, in addition to capital outflows from a strong dollar, rising treasury yields may be immediate sources of worry. But the rupee has started stabilized somewhat since mid-January, actually strengthened to 86.2 to the dollar from all-time lows of 86.7, and the dollar index too has fallen from outflows from rising treasury yields may be immediately sources of worry, but the rupee has stabilized somewhat since mid-January, actually strengthened to 86.22 dollar from some all-time lows of 86.7. And the dollar index too has fallen from 110 to just over 107 levels. The Trump factor could well settle into an equilibrium with the world and India learning to deal with it. The real worry isn't external but internal to India. Has the long-term growth story, which was never in doubt during the 2008 global crisis or even the 2013 taper tantrums, 2021 pandemic, soared. The coming budget presents an opportunity for the Narendra Modi government to unequivocally convey the India's growth story is intact and the country remains a compelling place for investors, but both domestic and global, to put their money. A rationalization of GST rates, which are clearly choking demand, is long overdue. So are unproductive expenditures, including on fertilizer and food subsidies, that can be redirected towards less markets distorting income support transfers and much needed physical as well as social infrastructure. Consumption demand will return only when there are investments that create jobs and incomes, and those investments will come with demonstrable government commitments to macroeconomic stability, policy predictability, and ease of doing business. The Modi government must send out message from the budget it means business. In a world of highly competitive broadcasting rights, Australian Open's animated streaming is democratizing access. Imagine watching a high stakes tennis match where players cease to be human not because adrenaline is pushing them to be superhuman feats, but because they are actually digital avatars, zipping across the courts like they had won too many cups of coffee. The Australian Open's latest experiment has given match broadcasting a twist, free and streaming straight to YouTube, but overlaid with animation and playing after a lag of 2 minutes to avoid the breach of broadcast contracts. The result has been an almost authentic match experience. The New York Times reports viewership has increased from 246,000 in the first 6 days of last year to 17 lakh at the same time frame this year. The integration of animation, live data, and creative storytelling is a glimpse into the future of sports media, where accessibility, fan engagement, and AI are likely to play a big role. Sports leagues such as NFL have already begun dabbling with the format. At the Australian Open, the broadcast, conceived like video games, cover the three main courts using data from Hawkeye system technology that relies on high-speed cameras to track movements before turning it into an animated transmission. A lot done, a more to do. Reflections on the eve of 75th Republic Day. Emerging from colonial rule, India, that is Bharat, saw its people transform into empowered citizens, putting together its constitution, a full-fledged democracy with universal adult franchise. This bold assertion of nation's democratic identity was in the wake of unparalleled sectarian violence. Thus, we step out of the old to new with a hope in our hearts and resolve to succeed. Many were the prophets who predicted the quick collapse of our carefully drafted constitution, a finely balanced system of governance, a democratic freedoms to its citizens, a guarantee of equality in form and substance, assurance of dignity and fraternity to everyone, and universal adult suffrage. At a time when Western nations did not provide such guarantees of equal participation or universal suffrage, the Constitution also held out the promise of social justice, distribution of material resources for the good of the greatest number. Our birthright, our Swaraj, was not only independence from the external ruler, but also resolve to economically and socially emancipate our citizens. At this 75th anniversary of our republic, there is so much to celebrate. From 32 years, the average life expectancy of citizens is now 75 years. India has become one of the largest producers of food grains. Literacy rate has increased from 12% to 75%. In power generation, road infrastructure development, we have made major strides. In size, our nation has the fifth largest economy globally. Our forays into space have shown spectacular successes. With the soft landing of Chandrayaan 3's Vikram, our election system and polity have shown stability that stands in stark contrast with our neighbors and even puts older democracies to shame. The 75th anniversary of our constitution is an opportune moment also for somber reflection. What does our constitution and governance system mean to the weakest, most disempowered people whose voices are mostly unheard? Our country has a starkly unequal distribution of wealth and income among its citizens. A tiny majority of our population earns the major source share of its income. Gross wealth of the nation, no doubt, has increased, but the spread and share of income is a matter of concern. Gender disparity is stark. The Constitution guarantees dignity, justice, including social and economic, and fraternity besides liberty. This guarantee of dignity and fraternity constitutes the essence of our basic rights, where individuals are bound to value each other's worth. This places greater responsibility on the state to ensure that each policy and law achieves the objective of meaningful access to education, public health, employment, and a basic standard of living, assuming self-worth and dignity to each uh, citizen. Assuring dignity involves going beyond providing basic human rights. It entails a commitment by the state and society to ensure what we have not achieved, the complete elimination of caste discrimination and caste stigmatization involving performance of tasks such as manual scavenging by the section of the weakest, most vulnerable section of people. True dignity and fraternity means practice of an attitude which we have not yet displayed, that every human being is capable of doing everything, that the poorest and the weakest are equal in worth and as secure with full rights of citizens as any other. The legal world which I have been a part of needs to be reimagined. There is much to be desired in terms of realizing the goal of quick and inexpensive justice. The oft repeated refrain that is the legal system is inordinately slow to the user, yes, that is true, but the fact alone should not obscure the crying need to address infrastructural and manpower issues that plague the courts. For an estimated population of 1.4 billion or 140 crore people, the sanctioned strength of judges overall is 25,000. There are a significant number of vacancies at any given time, and for the available judges, there are a little over than 20,000 courtrooms. The caseloads which most judges are expected to handle it is crushing and perhaps the world's largest. It could range from 60 to 150 cases each day. Most judges have little time to reflect, and their day is spent on managing the cases, getting on with the trials and long hearings, poring over the masses of documents, and finally even court hours, spending long hours analyzing facts, law, and writing judgments. There is an urgent need to develop long-term plans to address the systemic challenges of the court system, be it infrastructure, identification of causes of case arrears, optimal caseload of judges. Legal system needs to evolve and ensure quick, affordable justice delivery. Reforms in procedure and processes require cooperation with other wings of governance and ongoing public dialogue for achieving the goal of access to speedy justice. India is currently experiencing its own digital revolution, impacting everyday life from petty transactions or access to banking facilities to online retail marketplaces and access to education. What has undoubtedly propelled the nations in terms of progress also carries with it perils of exclusion, exacerbated by geographical limitations, limited individual spending capacities, and low levels of digital literacy. This digital divide has rendered millions vulnerable with regards to their rights, entitlements, and access to essential services. Lastly, efforts toward mitigating the disastrous impact of climate change on our geographically diverse and vast territory is the need of the hour. Experiencing an intensely warm climate, changing rainfall patterns, causing both droughts and flooding in equal measure across India, we face an imminent struggle that continues to adversely affect the state of public health, agriculture, nutrition, and public safety. The devastating impact which will continue to be disproportionately felt by the marginalized. Prosperity and well-being cannot be measured by gross national wealth, but the not net feeling of being well-being of each individual. Existing barriers, narrow domestic walls have to go. The challenge is how swiftly we as a nation can achieve equality and justice, social, economic, and political assured dignity of each individual. Beyond the China factor, Indonesian president visit could be a new turning point of for an old partnership. The key outcome of Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto's visit to India is likely to be an establishment of a broader and more strategic partnership between the two nations. This is expected to encompass greater depth and reflecting Prabowo's aspirations to position Indonesia as a significant player on the global stage. Beyond the confines of Asia, and Prabowo's vision suggests the emphasis on greater strategic autonomy while navigating the complexities of international order. In his perspectives align more closely with India. During the second term of Indonesian President Joko Widodo and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, their respective foreign ministers Retno Marsudi and S. Jaishankar forged an underplayed yet effective working relationship. Regular foreign ministerial consultations between the two nations gained momentum under them. This was further bolstered by India and Indonesia's consecutive presidencies of the G20 in 22 and 23. While India and Indonesia do not always share identical worldviews or voting patterns in forums such as United Nations, their increasing engagement has paved the way for a more coherent partnership. Prabowo, like Modi, is determined to elevate his country's global stature. A critical challenge lies in how Jaishankar builds a rapport with Indonesia's new foreign minister, Sui Sugiono. A successful partnership could enhance the prospects of high-profile Modi-Prabowo relationship, something the Modi-Jokowi dynamic could not fully achieve. Indonesia's membership of BRICS, granted in 23, presents another avenue for collaboration. Much like India and Brazil on BRICS platforms, India and Indonesia can leverage their partnerships to bring strategic heft to his bloc. While Indonesia is unlikely to deviate significantly from Chinese preferences due to its deep economic ties with Beijing, Prabowo's autonomous policy-making tendencies provide room for cooperation that transcends China factor. Prabowo has already made two trips to China, once as president-elect and another as president, highlighting the challenge of aligning Indonesia's stance with India's perspective on China. India and Indonesia must also identify areas of collaboration beyond China factor. The Indo-Pacific is one such domain. Indonesia, which initially displayed reticence on the Indo-Pacific concept, has evolved its stance significantly under Jokowi. Indonesia's membership of BRICS granted in 23 presents another avenue of collaboration. Much like India and Brazil on BRICS platforms, India and Indonesia can leverage their partnership to build strategic heft to this bloc. India and Indonesia must also identify areas of collaboration beyond the China factor. The Indo-Pacific is one such domain. Indonesia, which initially displayed reticence on the Indo-Pacific concept, has evolved its stance significantly. Under Jokowi, Indonesia played a leading role in crafting Asian outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This was instrumental in aligning the AOIP with India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative through a joint statement. Indonesia has committed to supporting the Maritime Resources Pillar under IPOI. By collaborating on projects within this pillar, the two nations can promote a pro-regional agenda beyond ASEAN, aligning with Prabowo's vision of creating an ASEAN Plus policy. Another potential area is the development of trilateral partnerships. India and Indonesia, alongside Australia, already have a trilateral framework, though it lacks substantial content. By collaborating on projects with the pillar, Asia's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, this was instrumental in aligning AOIP with India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative through a joint statement. Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. Another potential area is the development of trilateral partnerships. India and Indonesia, alongside Australia, already have a trilateral framework, though it lacks a substantial content. Prabowo's visit to New Delhi following his engagement with Australia could energize it. It can build upon Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative and the IORA, with India to set assume its chairmanship this year. India and Indonesia can also engage more directly how the ASEAN Plus One East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum meetings progress. Both should have prior consultations to make meaningful impact on such regional architecture. Myanmar, for instance, is an issue on which India and Indonesia have different views but have stayed in touch. This should expand. Indonesia should be invited to join the Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation to integrate it better with India's eastern neighborhood. Prabowo's visit to India also follows a successful visit by Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba to Jakarta. Japan has recently expanded its official security assistance policy to Indonesia, providing defense-related support. This opens the door for potential India-Japan-Indonesia trilateral partnership, leveraging platforms such as BRICS, IPOI, and trilateral frameworks with Australia and Japan. Both India and Indonesia can forge a deeper partnership. While differences in perspectives, particularly regarding China, persist, the focus must remain on areas of convergence. A robust India-Indonesia partnership has the potential to shape the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Quote TikTok and a precedent. The US Supreme Court shows how social media is the new oil. The greatest social and political capital of our time is human attention. Greatest social and political capital of our time is human attention, and the challenge for politicians today is how to capture it by using social media. It was therefore no surprise that the Supreme Court of the United States heard TikTok Inc. et al. Versus Merrick B. Garland, Attorney General, on an expedited basis and even declared the verdict on Jan 17. The case demonstrates how the discipline of law confronts the major technological advances, how a highly popular app resulting in judges diving into the world of social media regulation. First things first, TikTok was launched in 2017, has 170 million users in the US and 1 billion worldwide. It's rather extraordinary number given the population of the US is $344 million. Three correction 344 million. Population of US is 344 million. You can imagine how desirable the age app is for all groups that vie for human attention in a high value market like US. As Cotus neatly explains, Supreme Court. As Supreme Court of the United States explains, in 23 US TikTok users uploaded more than 5.5 billion videos, which in turn were viewed more than 30 trillion times around the world. It further noted TikTok operated in the United States by TikTok Inc., an American company incorporated and headquartered in California. TikTok Inc.'s ultimate parent company is ByteDance Limited, a privately held company held that has operations in China. This promoted the security concerns of the US government, given the data pertaining to 170 million Americans is in hand of a Chinese company. Supreme Court of the United States summarized the problem as follows. ByteDance Limited owns TikTok proprietary algorithms which are developed and maintained in China. The company is also responsible for developing portions of the source code and returns and runs to the TikTok platform. ByteDance is subject to Chinese laws that require it to assist or cooperate with the Chinese government's intelligence work and to ensure that Chinese government has the power and access to control private data that company holds. The TikTok saga spanned both Donald Trump's first and administration and Joe Biden's administration. President Trump issued an executive order in 2020 finding that the spread of in the United States of mobile applications developed and owned by companies in China continues to threaten national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. Subsequently, US Congress enacted the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act that made it unlawful for any entity to provide services to distribute, maintain, or update a foreign adversary controlled application in the country. Meanwhile, if the app undergoes a qualified divestiture, one where the president determines that it is no longer controlled by a foreign adversary, then it will allow to function. TikTok was allowed to function with its existing ownership structure till January 17, 2025. In a judgment upholding the act, the court ruled that divestiture requirement for purposes of preventing foreign adversary from accessing sensitive data of 170 million users is not subtle means of exercising content preference, adding that